For today's video, I want to go over why I believe that Limnophila Sessiliflora is one of the best plants that you can add to a Walstad Method aquarium, and why I'll likely be including it in every one of my future Walstad tanks, at least for the first 3 months. This tall, lush green plant in the back right hand corner of my betterfish tank is Limnophila Sessiliflora. It's also known as Ambulia and Asian Marshweed in certain locations, but it's the exact same plant. It's native to an extremely wide region, starting from India, going through Southeast Asia, into East Asia and all the way up to Japan, covering a wide range of water parameters and temperatures. Last year, I kept it in one of my room temperature shrimp jars, which dropped down to 18 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and the plant didn't melt. That said, it did enter dormancy and stopped growing over the winter months, but as soon as spring arrived, it bounced back and started growing again at a rapid pace. As a stem plant, it's usually left in the background of the tank to grow as tall as it likes, and then you'll trim it as required. But one of my favourite things about Limnophila Sessiliflora that keeps scoring at points over other plants is its thin, feathery leaves. The leaves of this plant are extremely soft and flexible, so my fish can swim straight through them without issue and any risk to their fins or tail. Moving on, and I want to talk about why Limnophila Sessiliflora is such an excellent plant for any type of Walstad Method aquarium, be it filtered or completely filterless. In short, it comes down to the extremely fast growth rate of the plant. I currently have over 60 aquatic plants in my collection, and I've probably kept close to 80 in total, and Limnophila Sessiliflora is hands down the fastest growing submerged plant I've ever kept. What makes it even better is that it thrives in low-tech setups like Walstad Method tanks, making it extremely beginner friendly, and it's commonly recommended as an alternative to more difficult, more light demanding plants such as Kabomba. To support its rapid growth rate, it needs to pull a large amount of compounds from the water which are toxic to fish but nutrients to plants, and that's how it supports its rapid growth rate and keeps your water parameters safe and stable. To give you a real life example, this is my new Walstad Method betterfish tank, which is 27 days old today. But this is what it looked like back on day 1, and you can see the size of the Limnophila in the background of the tank back then a couple of weeks ago, and then we'll flash back to today and you can see how rapidly it's actually grown. All of that new plant mass has been built using the harmful nitrogen compounds and a variety of dissolved solid ions that would otherwise just be in the tank until you do a water change. Moving on, and we get to the lighting requirements for this plant, and that's one of my favourite things about it. Now, you might have noticed that my Walstad Method betterfish tank is running a Chihiros AII light, which I do personally consider to be at the upper end of the entry level lighting range. But in my experience, Limnophila Sessiliflora doesn't need expensive high-end lighting to thrive. The only reason this particular tank is running a Chihiros AII light is because I wanted to do some testing with Rotala Blood Red, and so far it's working great and I'm loving the red colour of the plant. But Limnophila Sessiliflora doesn't require that light intensity, and I have proof, and we can jump over to my other betterfish tank to show it here. This is my filterless aquasoil betterfish tank running a Haiga 957 light, which I'd class as being in the mid-range of the entry-level bracket when it comes to price, and as you can see, the Limnophila Sessiliflora is absolutely thriving in here too. Even better than that though, we can go over to my filterless Endless Life Bearer Walstad Method tank, and this is running on a very affordable entry-level Seaoura SR616 light, which this particular version for this size tank is less than $20, and again, you can see the Limnophila Sessiliflora in the background is absolutely thriving. My point is that you do not need expensive high-powered lighting for this plant to thrive, and I'm literally growing it on the most budget-friendly price light that I can think of in the hobby right now, and it's thriving without issue. And in case you're wondering, these lights are run at maximum intensity for 6 hours per day right now. Now, you might be wondering if there's a major difference between the lighting intensities, and there is, but it's very, very minimal. Under both the Chihiros AII and Haiga 957, I'm currently trimming my Limnophila Sessiliflora every 2 weeks or so. Still, under the entry-level Seaoura SR616 light, I'm still trimming the plant every 3 weeks or so it's really not that much. On a percentage basis, it's about 30% less, but this is very easy to counter because you can quickly and easily add 30% more stems to the tank, but more on that later. Moving on, and we get to water parameter requirements for this plant to thrive, and to be honest, I haven't run into any problems with any of my own tanks. As I mentioned earlier, this plant has a massive native range starting at India and going all through Southeast Asia and East Asia all the way up to Japan, so it just covers a huge range of water parameters naturally. My tap water has a pH of 6.4, a GH of 4 and a KH of 3. Now that is fairly soft and slightly acidic, and the plant does really well in these conditions. But I do have Sirius stored in one of my betta fish tanks, which slowly releases calcium carbonate in the water to raise its hardness, and like I said, the Limnophila in this tank is grown perfectly fine without issue. Unlike some plants which can struggle with ammonia toxicity during the cycling process of a new tank, Limnophila actually puts that ammonia to good use and takes full advantage of it. This is because it readily absorbs the ammonium from the water column to grow at a rapid pace and turns that excess ammonia during the cycling process into excess plant growth. Now the pH of your water will come into play with that one, and softer, more acidic water will be better because there's more excess hydrogen ions to convert the toxic ammonia into the ammonium that the plants will prefer to take up as their nitrogen source, but even in a harder alkaline water setup, it's still going to have an ammonia to ammonium ratio for the plant to thrive. This helps to establish a more plant-based nitrogen cycle, what can be more stable and lead to faster stabilization times in a new planted tank setup. There is one thing I do want to stress though, and that is that Limnophila Sessiliflora can actually grow so quickly in low bio-load tanks it can end up starving itself and the other plants in the tank, and it kind of develops a black patchy colour and then eventually just melts away. That's the main reason that until recently I was supplementing my other betta fish tank with liquid fertiliser once a week because the Limnophila was just starving everything else out, but the ram's horn snail and yellow neocaridina shrimp populations are at a level where I can slowly and safely start to increase the food in the tank, so I haven't been adding liquid fertilisation. As I mentioned earlier, when I kept this plant in my room temperature shrimp jar last winter, it was down to 18 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and the plant did go dormant over the winter months and stop growing. This is a potential issue for a filterless Walstad Method tank because if the plant isn't grown, it's not removing toxins from the water, potentially putting your fish at risk. So, if possible, use a heater to maintain tropical water temperatures and keep your plant active year-round. That said, I've only recently re-added a heater to my filterless Endless Life Bearer Walstad Method tank, and before I added the heater, it was averaging 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit, and the plant was grown without issue and needed trimming every 3 weeks. Moving on, and we get to propagation and maintenance, and I want to talk about them together because they do go hand in hand with stem plants. The rapid growth rate of Limnophila Sessiliflora means that you're not only going to be doing regular maintenance, but you're going to be ending up with a lot of free plants along the way. Regardless of your specific aquarium setup, I do think you're going to be trimming this plant at least once a month, maybe twice a month like some of my tanks with it in. It's just one of those things with a fast-growing plant. But the great thing is, when you're trimming those healthy tops off the stems, you can easily replant them back into the substrate as cuttings and they'll grow their own root system and eventually grow into a brand new plant. So you might remember earlier in the video when I said that under my entry-level Seaoura SR616 light, the plant needs trimming every 3 weeks instead of 2, so you can just add 30% more stems to maintain the same natural water purification. This is where it all comes into play. Just wait for the plant's first trimming session, take the healthy tops off and then plant them as required in your tank, and you'll get the extra plants for free because it's just excess growth being put to use instead of left to compost. Next, I want to explain why I'm planning to add Limnophila Sessiliflora to all of my future Walstad Method aquariums at least for the first 3 months. As much as I love the Walstad method, it does have some flaws. One of the main challenges is that the soil does release a large amount of water-soluble nutrients into the water column for the first few weeks after setup. Now you can manage this by doing a lot of water changes if you prefer, and eventually the nutrient leaching will slow down as the excess nutrients are released from the soil. But there is another, easier approach, and that's adding Limnophila Sessiliflora to the tank from the very start, ideally with a source of water flow. This plant can easily be used as a temporary nutrient sponge during the first few weeks, and once things stabilise, if you like, you can choose to remove it and replace it with slow grown stem plants to hold the filtration. An excellent example of this is my beginner friendly Walstad Method tank, which at the time of recording this video is less than 6 days old, and the most important thing is that I've never had an ammonia detectable hit on my test kit. Now that is definitely not normal, and usually within the first week I get around 0.5 ppm ammonia in my Walstad Method tanks because of the specific soil I use. Right now though, this specific tank has a few stems of Limnophila Sessiliflora in the background and a small USB water pump helping to move the water to the plant and get those toxins naturally filtered out as it grows. Now I do have some Spiridella polyriza or giant duckweed on the surface of this which will be helping, but judging by the growth rate, the majority of the natural water purification in this specific tank is coming out of the Limnophila Sessiliflora stems. Another good example is this tank, which is also less than a week old at the time of recording, and I have some Limnophila Sessiliflora in the back right corner. Now I did get some detectable ammonia on my test kit for this specific tank for the first 2 days, but then I decided to add one of the small USB water pumps to the tank, and since then I haven't had a detectable hit. It just goes to show how helpful water flow can be when the excess nutrient spike is being released out of the soil after a new setup. Because the plants are stationary, they sometimes need a little help moving the toxins from the water to the plant. Personally, I do really like the look of this plant, so I'll be keeping it in my tanks anyway, but if you just want a short-term nutrient sponge, this is a perfect solution. And then once the tank is more stable and a lot of the water-soluble nutrients has been released from the soil, usually after a month or 2 or sometimes 3 depending on the specific soil you're using, you can remove the Limnophila and replace it with something like Rotala Rotundifolia, which will still purify the water and grow at a slower pace, requiring less maintenance. Speaking of Rotala Rotundifolia, I do want to quickly compare it to Limnophila Sessiliflora along with a few other popular plants that I often recommend for Walstad Method aquariums. Aside from the obvious visual differences, the main distinction between Limnophila Sessiliflora and Rotala Rotundifolia is their growth rate. In my tap water parameters, Limnophila grows very quickly while Rotala Rotundifolia has a moderate growth rate. That slow growth rate does make the Rotala a better option for anyone who's looking to create a low maintenance Walstad Method tank, since it doesn't need trimming anywhere near as much as the Limnophila. However, because it does grow at a far slower pace, you definitely need a lot more stems in the back of your tank to offer the same level of natural water purification. So the downside to that is that adding more stems to the tank can reduce swimming space for your fish or limit the amount of hardscape that you can add to the tank to make it look like an aquascape. That said, Rotala Rotundifolia is still an excellent plant which is very easy to grow. I actually quite like the look of it, and it's very versatile, and it's definitely one of my favourite plants for a Walstad setup. Next up is Pearlweed, and again this is an excellent plant for any Walstad Method tank, and I keep it in 2 of my setups right now, and in my experience the actual growth rate is very similar to Limnophila Sessiliflora, maybe slightly slower, but it's still an extremely fast growing plant. But what gives Pearlweed the upper hand in some setups is the sheer number of stems it can produce, especially if you're going to leave it to grow free in a Pearlweed jungle tank like this. Unlike Limnophila Sessiliflora, which focuses on vertical growth, Pearlweed would eventually start creeping out horizontally and just dominate the entire tank if you don't keep it under control. Now you can manage this with regular trimming if you like, but in my experience it's a lot easier to just adapt a Pearlweed jungle tank like this and leave it to take over and do its thing. In my experience, if you want to use other plants in the tank, then the Limnophila Sessiliflora is definitely the better option because it has a more predictable growth pattern. It's just going to keep going up. But if you just want an easy to grow plant that will naturally grow out and take over everything, helping to keep your costs as low as possible because a single tub of Pearlweed grew all of this plant mass, then Pearlweed can take the lead. Finally, we have Duckweed, which is a floating plant that is easily one of the most effective natural purifiers in the hobby. The downside is also its main advantage, which is its rapid growth rate, and once it's in your tank, it's an absolute pain to get rid of completely. Due to this, a lot of people just avoid Duckweed altogether and go with other types of floating plants. That said, Duckweed can be useful, especially if you're wanting to take the filterless Walstad Method approach, because it has easy access to CO2 from the atmosphere and has an insanely fast growth rate, absorbing a lot of toxic compounds from the water. While I am keeping Duckweed in some of my tanks, I do want to increase my aquatic plant collection with other floating plants in some of my setups, so moving forward, my plan is to use some Limnophila Sessiliflora stems to be that ultra fast growing plant to soak up all of the excess nutrients and toxins, and let me use slow growing plants like redroot floaters on the surface of my tanks. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. I hope it's been helpful. Thanks for watching and good luck with your Walstad Method aquariums. I will link to a blog post in the description going over all of my favourite plants for this type of setup, but Limnophila is definitely up there.